This is The World According to Jen and Carolyn.
Hey, girl.
Hello. Happy Sunday or
Happy
some
Sunday.
such shit.
Thanks for listening to my rants.
Oh, yeah.
It's been a week.
It has been a week. I don't know. I don't know what's going on. I mean, I know what's going on. The world is an absolutely crazy place, and it feels like it's getting crazier by the day. And, you know, there's some hopeful stuff out there, like the size of the rallies that are being held by folks like AOC and Jasmine Crockett and Bernie.
Did you
That
watch
speaks
any of
volumes. I didn't get to watch them. I saw
watched
pictures.
2 of them.
Okay.
And the one that was in Denver yesterday had an indigenous powwow that did a circle dance.
Nice.
And a drumming circle. Oh, so
dope.
That's where all my anger went. It was good. It was
My
really,
mom was supposed
really
to go
good.
because she's in Denver and you just RSVP. It's free. And I don't know how she'd be able to handle that because crowds aren't her thing. I'm like, are you sure this is for you? But she did want to go.
It made me feel better.
Good. And I think
just put it that way.
Yeah. And I think the size of the crowds that are showing up for town halls, even when the Republican representatives don't show up, and in some cases, Democrats are not showing up, Chuck Schumer, it is the time to show up. That's a strategy that I think could really bolster the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
We need to show up in our districts for Democrats and Republicans alike.
Well, I felt like Bernie and AOC were even saying we have to look at something different.
Right.
The way they were talking was more independent.
Good. Well, that makes more sense. I mean, especially with Bernie. So,
like, if you're not here to support us, then get the fuck out of the way because you're in the way.
Right. Well, they're about
the tone.
promoting populist policies that benefit the majority of us, which explains why, back when Bernie and Trump were running in 2016, Trump ended up getting a lot of the districts, a lot of the areas that went for Bernie in the primaries.
Oh, interesting.
It's really fascinating. It's people who want something different. And it's people who, I'm trying not to move our janky ass setup here. So
our card table.
I know. We got to get fancier, man. I think the time has come. We got to get fancier. But anyway, it's interesting to see that. And it's also interesting to see the Democratic Party and people like Gavin Newsom, who we're pretty disappointed with right now, trying to go not even just center, but entertaining the most vicious, disgusting, toxic people on the right, like Steve Bannon. Like, this is not going to win you votes.
It was weird.
It is weird.
I listened to I think there's probably been more episodes, but I listened to all 3 of them.
Okay. And I've only heard clips.
It shouldn't. Well, the Steve Bannon one should have just been called the Steve Bannon Show. Oof. Like, it's really Gavin just being like,
just giving him a platform,
and like trying to just talk like he's like, well, you know how we are in San Francisco. Like, there's like this weird like homeboy thing going on with like, San Francisco, and like with the one with who's that guy, Michael Savage. It was all about just like the good old days of SF, which was fun. That was fun to listen to. Yeah, but I'm not for whatever he's doing and whatever side he's trying. It's almost like Trump, like pulled him aside. I was like, if you want to win, you need to kind of start going this way.
I don't think he would have necessarily had that sort of conversation. I think, unfortunately, there are a lot of folks in the Democratic Party who think, we need to actually get more moderate.
Yes.
And that's not how we're going to win.
No.
And that strategy, I think, is some bullshit. And even my husband, who initially, when Gavin was walking back some of his stuff in regards to trans folks, was like, well, it's strategic, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no, this is bullshit. And now not even my husband can make any sort of excuses for Gavin with how far he's gone with like Charlie Kirk and Steve Bannon and Michael Savage. And it's just bad. Yeah. It's really bad.
That's
anyway,
why We have big feelings again.
We always have big feelings, and we're here to talk to you. Actually, we're here to condemn the government.
Weird.
Democrats and Republicans alike, because today's episode, now that we've talked for the last 4 minutes about shit that's not related directly,
well, kind of is.
So yeah, indirectly to this episode. So we're going to talk about government guinea pigs and how the U.S. government actually has this documented history of conducting unethical experiments on people, often without their consent. And these experiments, spanning from the 19th century through the late 20th century, were sometimes justified under the guise of medical research, national security, or public health. So we're going to take you on a very disturbing historical journey, highlighting what we think are the most egregious experiments conducted by our government, mostly on American citizens and to a large extent on people of color and low-income folks. So
prepare to be activated.
Yeah,
some of this is a little hard.
It is. It's
a lot of it is
disgusting.
Really hard.
Yeah, and this isn't even all of it, y'all.
No.
This is what we could distill into a 5-minute or a 1-hour episode. I was looking at the counter for our Riverside.
I don't think we could ever do anything in 5. I can't even do something in 1 minute.
I know, it's really
long-winded as shit.
It's hard to be concise. Brevity is not our strong suit. So, Carolyn, prior to putting this episode together, were you familiar with any of these experiments?
Well, definitely Tuskegee. I think I had when I worked in cardiac therapy, we had a client who was a Tuskegee Airman.
Whoa.
And
not airmen. That's something different.
Oh, okay.
The Tuskegee Airmen were an elite group of Black pilots during World War II, I believe. And then there was the Tuskegee Experiments, which was the syphilis thing.
But I remember hearing about that and knowing the connection between the two. But, and also just anything psychology related.
Yeah.
Always heard about.
Right.
I mean, most of psychological research and specifically in gynecology too. A lot of early gynecology that we know was performed on enslaved African women, Native American women.
Yeah. Some sick shit, man.
Yeah.
I mean, I was definitely aware of Tuskegee and then MK Ultra. I know quite a bit about MK Ultra
because of our fascination. Is it a fascination with Manson?
Yeah, but I knew about it prior to that. That documentary that we're going to touch on briefly that just came out was the first time I had ever heard about the hypothesis that he was part of the MK, an unknowing participant in the MK Ultra experiment.
Which again, when you're mentally ill, but you're talking about the government, you kind of sound not ill.
And also, it's like in that documentary, and when we talked about this, it's like, oh, well, that won't make sense as to why people followed him to the extent that they did, i.e. killing innocent people. But I'm like, but that's cults in general. And a cult leader is persuasive. I mean, look at Heaven's Gate. Yeah. That dude was so persuasive. He compelled people to take their own lives thinking that they were going to fly away on a motherfucking spaceship. Like, there was no MK Ultra needed for that shit, man. So I don't think it was a necessary ingredient to get the Manson followers to do what they did. Yeah. But a lot of the quote unquote evidence or facts that they brought in to substantiate that claim make a lot of fucking sense.
Absolutely.
We're going to get to that. So we're actually going to break this episode down into 3 segments. So we're going to talk first about medical and biological experiments, followed by radiation and chemical experiments, and finally, Carolyn's favorite, psychological and sociological experiments. Yay. All right. So as promised, we're going to start with medical and biological. Let me just make sure we are still recording. Oh, picture-in-picture mode closed. Okay. Anyway, whatever.
I see you.
Oh, do you? I had a little like truncated version, kind of like when I'm multitasking at work and I'm in a remote meeting and I shouldn't be, but I have the tiny version of Zoom in the corner so I can see people's faces in the event that I'm going to get called on. Anyway, that view has disappeared from my screen. So we're going to start with the Tuskegee syphilis study, which was from 1932 all the way to 1972.
Wow.
It was conducted by the U.S. Public Health Service in Alabama, and this study observed the progression of untreated syphilis in 600 Black men. Even after penicillin became the standard treatment for syphilis in the 1940s, researchers withheld treatment to continue studying the disease. Many participants suffered severe health issues and some died. The study study was exposed in 1972, leading to public outrage and reforms in medical ethics. Thank God. There was also a Guatemalan syphilis experiment. This was from 1946 to 1948, much shorter. So the U.S. government researchers with Guatemalan officials, this makes sense. This was leading up to the coup, deliberately infected prisoners, mental health patients, and soldiers with syphilis and other STDs or STIs. Many victims were never treated. The experiment was uncovered in 2010, prompting a formal U.S. government apology. We're sorry we infected you with syphilis.
What were they trying to study? They knew.
I don't know.
Like, they knew that penicillin worked.
And they knew what syphilis did to you and your body and your brain.
Why? Like, I don't even know why you'd be doing that.
I don't get it. I feel like we knew
fucked up.
That there were no big secrets, no big syphilis secrets to uncover at that point. I had never heard about this. This makes me want to scratch myself.
I know, right?
Operation Big Itch in 1954. It was a flea bomb experiment, or several of these experiments. The U.S. Army tested the viability of using fleas as biological weapons by releasing them from the aircraft over Dugway Proving Ground in Utah. These fleas were infected with bubonic plague. To study disease transmission. What the actual fuck, man? Outcome. The government continued developing biological insect warfare through its nuclear or unclear whether any real world deployment occurred. What the actual fuck?
That's fucked up. Fleas are bad enough, and then you give them the bubonic plague.
Something just occurred to me. Didn't RFK say that Lyme disease was manufactured by the government?
Yes.
Okay, so obviously we think he's
already.
I know, I'm like clawing at myself. Obviously we think he's crazy, but I'm like, oh shit, there's some basis for these beliefs.
Everything that he says that's crazy.
Yeah.
Like, it's always the crazy ones. Like, the conspiracy theories also always are based in some kernel of reality.
Always a grain of truth. I swear to God. So then there was also something called Project 112 and Project SHAD from 1960. I shad myself. 1962 to 1973. This was chemical and biological warfare testing on U.S. troops. The U.S. Department of Defense conducted secret chemical and biological warfare tests on military personnel, spraying ships and coastal areas with nerve agents called VX sarin. This is what Putin uses against his enemies. And biological agents such as Coxella burnetii, which causes Q fever or O fever. I can't see if there's a little tail on that guy. Okay. Oh, I'm going to show her my O fever face. Actually, this isn't funny. Stop it. Soldiers were told. Got to bring some levity to this.
I know. This is fucked up shit.
It is. That they were participating in training exercises and were never informed that they were exposed to deadly toxins.
That's some fucked up shit.
It is. Many of these veterans suffered long-term health complications, including cancers and neurological disorders. So, Carolyn, you and I love mentioning how we never learned about a lot of this shit in school, or a lot of the topics we discussed. So I don't think we're alone. How does the absence of education on these topics in school curricula contribute to a lack of awareness and accountability in the general public?
Well, no doy.
Yeah.
By not including these topics, and this is where it's really timely, right? The system reinforces a sanitized version of history and maintains the status quo. People are going to remain, like, even just noticing that some of these things didn't come out till 2010.
Yeah.
These are classified things. They're not necessary, and reporters have to have access to this. Someone has to whistleblow, or someone has to do something to get
Freedom
this
of Information Act,
right?
And a lot of it's redacted.
So, yeah, not whistleblow.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you're unaware of past injustices, you're not going to push for accountability and safeguards to prevent them from happening again.
Yeah.
So here's a couple of reasons why, though, that this happens. And when we get to the end, I'll have a very good question for you.
Okay.
As a parent and someone in education.
Oh boy.
Connected to education. All right. So knowledge gaps lead to blind trust. So when historical context about government experimenting on humans, such as some of the things you just mentioned, and I'm even going to include animals here as an animal lover. Yeah. I don't like that either.
Sure.
You know, you got to tell people and places what's going on, right?
Yeah.
People are less likely to question authority or recognize patterns of unethical behavior.
Yeah.
I think in academics, we are very sit on a high hill saying that things should be a certain way, but we all know that unless someone's overseeing this, and even within that there's corruption,
sure,
which is why we need oversight, because you can't trust people.
Right. Yeah.
This is going to make me more distrusting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Big one. Lack of critical thinking on power and ethics. So schools often focus on patriotism and civic duty without ever teaching the darker aspects of history. I'm even going to say they rewrite those dark aspects of history to make the dominant culture seem better.
Yeah.
So
that's what Trump's doing right now.
Literally right now.
Yeah.
This omission prevents people from critically analyzing the ethical failures in institutions and advocating for transparency.
Yeah.
When you are the person who is being tested on, this is part of your history.
Yeah.
You're in a different state of awareness.
Right.
It's much harder, and you use so much more energy trying to disprove these things, I think, as a white person.
Yeah.
Because you're fighting against something that you were told different versus someone who knows this is true because they've lived it and it's part of their history. So you're gonna, that's that white body problem, right? It's that anger and that rage and that inability to let go of something that you're like, but this is the truth.
Yeah. And that makes sense too. And what really resonates with me is like, if you're a person who has personally gone through these experiments, you happen to be a person of color, which these experiments were perpetrated against communities of color. And you have to, it must be exhausting. Not only have you gone through the abuse, but now you have to prove to somebody who doesn't have any knowledge.
Yeah.
Who's sitting there and telling you this didn't happen, this isn't true. It's the same thing with, I don't want to say this is less severe than somebody being tested on, but somebody who experiences racism and microaggressions on a daily basis and has a white person saying, oh, you're just playing the race card. You're like, bro, I live this every day. Like, I was face down on the concrete because a cop decided that he didn't like me when he pulled me out of the car because of the color of my skin. And you have a white person saying, that's not true. Or anybody telling you your lived experience is not valid.
It's basically not, you might know this, you can't call it post-traumatic stress disorder that person is experiencing because it's pervasive. It's still happening.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And so exactly to that point. So yeah, it's again, why we just give people the truth, but obviously that doesn't work very well because that's how racism keeps happening.
Well, then you need allies too. Like you need people who are going to help, who have privilege and power and access to be able to use that platform to get the truth out there.
Because the truth is out there.
Yes. Yes, it is, Mulder.
All right. So accountability requires awareness. Thank you for that segue. If people don't know these events happen, they can't demand justice, reform, and safeguards against future abuses. The lack of education enables history to repeat itself. Yeah. And that's built into the system. It's created that way. This is interesting. Misinformation fills the void. You and I talked about this, interestingly, we talked about online dating. Whatever's not there, my brain is going to fill in with something probably better than is actually the reality. So when institutions fail to educate, people turn to alternative sources, which may not be accurate.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. That's the different form of this. But that's the other thing too, is you might even, you and I got into a little spat with someone this weekend who was talking about trans kids and really using information that to them they thought was science-based and valid, when it's to you and I, it's not.
Subreddits aren't science. I'm sorry, but I'm going to be over here.
Experience.
And you can't even prove that it's lived experience because anybody could write a fucking subreddit. Me and Carolyn, we're going to be over here with the American Medical Association and the American Association of Pediatrics. That's where we're going to get our motherfucking information, and not subreddits.
Trans children that we're working with and are exposed to I'm going to say on a regular basis, and friends who are dealing with this stuff. So I don't know, it's a little more accurate.
Right.
Two. All right. Disconnect from bodily autonomy and consent. A lack of historical awareness. This is huge for me in somatic therapy. When you don't have the historical awareness, you're not going to have that body awareness, and forced medical experiments make it harder for individuals to recognize violations of their rights in modern contexts, such as coercive medical treatments and unethical practices. There's also that idea too of that has been, maybe it's gone a little too far in the other direction in some ways, but the white coat syndrome, that the doctor has right and whatever he or she wants to do is is gold standard. And we know from the hand that rocks the cradle that that's not true.
Yeah.
And if you're uncomfortable with something that's giving you an asthma attack, something bad is happening.
You went deep on the plot of the hand that rocks the cradle. Yes. Yes.
Because he shouldn't have done that.
No, he should have. God damn it.
And that ruined everything. That ruined everyone's life.
That poor woman.
Julianne
lost her baby and then became homicidal. Started breastfeeding the baby that wasn't hers. Poor fucking Solomon was accused of touching children.
He didn't do shit.
He didn't do it.
He saved her.
He was the best.
Yeah.
God bless
Emma.
Solomon.
Love
Wow,
Emma.
we really went on a fucking another trajectory there.
It's the poppies. They make me happy. This
Are you on heroin? What the
No. My drink, this is not urine. It's poppy. I'm trying not to drink as much alcohol.
Heroin poppies.
Not heroin poppy. No. All right. This feels pretty relevant, like we said, given that the Department of Education
I was just thinking of that.
Just got trumped.
Yeah.
Education, I actually looked this up, but my stupid ChatGPT didn't save it. But, you know, the U.S. is not a leader in education as it is.
Not.
And I'm sorry, like, I love math, science, and all these things, but when we're not educators in history and reading and writing, when we're not focused on the arts, we are not enhancing the parts of our brain that inspire curiosity and inspire discourse. So this is my question, though, because this is what I think the bottom line is. So for you as a parent and someone who's married to someone in education, you've been in education, people say, well, it's not the school's problem to teach all this. It's up to you to do your own shit. And we've talked about this, that, you know, you're busy enough.
Right.
I got to assume that my school is at least teaching a curriculum that is approved. And yes, absolutely. In the home, I was not taught these things and it wasn't offered to me.
Right.
It didn't occur to me at that age to go to a library and start reading. I wasn't looking into that until much later in my life.
Well, you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
You didn't even know that these truths were out there, because for us, history was so whitewashed. Yeah. And look, my expectations are a bit different given that Liam is going to Catholic school, right? I can't expect it to be as radical as I would like it to be. And that's where I get to come in and augment his education. But if he's coming home and it really depends. Like if he's coming home and saying anti-LGBTQ things because that's what he learned in school, we're going to have a major problem. Fortunately, his school is not like that. And I love his school for that. But it also bothers me immensely that the history that he might learn, we're not there yet. He's only in first grade. So the history he's learning is very basic. I'm concerned that important historical figures and events are going to be omitted. And so I'm going to be scrutinizing the lessons that he learns as he progresses in his education, because that's really important to me. And this is why I want him to go to my husband's alma mater, because they are Jesuit and they teach it's not even radical shit. They teach the truth.
The truth.
They teach the truth. And it's unfortunate that there is such a high premium on that kind of education because it's expensive, y'all. And at the same time, like, I know this personally because my first real boyfriend was at this school and I was at a public school. And he was 1 year younger than me. And the things that he was learning
100%
were
agreed,
eye-opening.
And I went to a Catholic school, not Jesuit, but we didn't learn those same things.
Because it wasn't Jesuit.
No.
That's why I want him to go to a Jesuit school, because social justice is the undercurrent. And for me, social justice and a truthful recanting of history go hand in hand.
Well, and this is what bothers me with little kids, because even when I worked at a preschool, there was this sort of like, when they were talking about, I think it was even Hanukkah, and they were saying, well, don't mention there was a war.
What?
Like, we want them just to see the happy part of Hanukkah and the happy part. And there's this was the other thing about our kertuffle with this person. I don't like when people think kids who can't handle this shit. That really bothers me. The image of the child to me is that they're completely capable. And actually, the younger you teach them these things, the less traumatic they are.
I agree.
Death, and again,
You
in
soften
context,
it.
you soften them, but also, but no, I mean, it's very simple.
Right.
Kids actually do really well. They know when something doesn't make sense. And
Yeah.
I don't like that, you're getting Columbus in 1492.
Yeah, that bothers me.
It's like putting it in a song. It's like, kids can handle this shit.
Right.
They're not stupid.
Right.
And I don't like that when it comes to sex,
Yeah.
when it comes to religion, and when it comes to history, we're not seeing the image of the child as completely capable.
We're not trusting our kids. And that, again, full circle back to that person who thinks that they understood what they don't understood in regard to gender affirming care, and what a child specifically, this was one of my big pet peeves with what this person was saying, is that when you're under 18, you don't know anything. And I'm like,
that's so untrue.
Can you please trust children? Because if my child came to me tomorrow and said, he's 7, right? Oh, I feel more like a girl than a boy, because that is how he would characterize it. Yeah. I'd be like, let's explore this. Yeah. That doesn't mean going and having bottom surgery right away, which these nutcases think gender affirming care is. It's like, I'm going to listen to you. Mm-hmm. You're telling me something, and we're going to explore it.
Yeah.
And I trust that you are trying to figure something out. Yeah. You may not know what you're trying to figure out yet, but there's something there.
And I guess you and I just feel differently about children for that reason, because no one ever talked them to us.
No,
maybe they should.
I think for better or for worse, we were both treated like adults and expected to process things like adults, which is not what we're advocating for here. Honesty, but soft honesty, right? Yeah. Like when I told my kid when he was 5 about Columbus, I was honest, but I did it in a way that was understandable and digestible for a small person.
Yeah. And you don't have to make this stuff up either. No. There's tools out there for parents.
There are.
Because it is a tricky conversation.
Right.
So don't reinvent the wheel. And I think a lot of parents don't trust their kids.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of parents don't trust themselves.
Right.
Because they haven't been given these tools to learn and think. So yeah, we have to do better.
Well, it's only going to get worse with the dismantling of the Department of Education.
But maybe it won't.
I'm hoping it won't. But I think
maybe this isn't a coffin. Maybe it's a womb.
Oh my God.
And there's a rebirth. Yeah. There's a woman who was doing. Did you read? She did a whole spoken word thing.
No.
I'll send it to you. It's really powerful. It'll make you cry. But she's like, this isn't a coffin. It's a womb. And we're screaming our way through. I'm like, yeah, girl.
I'll be into it. I like to make fun of shit like that. And
it's really good.
Cry by myself in my room as I watch it and listen to it. So, all right, on to radiation and chemical experiments. Woo! So here we go. Operation White Coat is a thing. 1954 to 1973. That's a long ass time. The U.S. Army conducted biological warfare experiments on volunteers, mostly Seventh-day Adventist servicemen. I don't know why. They were exposed to diseases like, is this O fever or Q fever?
I'm going to look up what Q fever is.
Because it looks like it's a Q. Because it does look like it's a Q. It's underlined. Maybe if I remove the underlining, then it will be more obvious as to whether or not it's a...
What's Q fever?
God damn it. What am I doing?
It's infection caused by bacteria Coxella brunelli, and it's from sheep, goat, and cattle.
Ooh. It sounds like mad cow. Okay. Yeah. Anyway, now we know what it is. Q fever, bro.
So it is a thing.
Called tularemia, yellow fever, to test vaccines and treatments. That's why these folks were subjected to that. Okay, I don't know why it had to be Seventh-day Adventists. There must be more to that.
They're great.
They're very healthy people.
They're very healthy. They're in the blue zone.
They are. They're blue zone folk.
They eat really well.
Well, they don't eat meat. Yeah. They have great shits. I told you about my mom every summer for multiple years. She had a friend who was kind of on the wild side, but then she married a Seventh-day Adventist dude. And they lived in like this beautiful area, like the woods near Sacramento. Ooh. And so my mom would send me there for a week every summer, and I would have to like not eat meat. And I was already skinny as fuck. And they're like, here's some granola. I'm like, bitch, where's the burgers? But they were mad.
Where's my Taco Bell?
I know. Where is the McDonald's? Where's the Taco Bell? So they hiked all the time. They were hella fit. Yeah. They were vegetarian. I was like, y'all are healthy as fuck.
I can get down with that. Q fever is called Q fever because it stands for query. It got the name query fever when people started coming down with it in the 1930s in Australia, and doctors didn't know what caused it. So they had queries.
Got it. Wow, that's simplistic and makes a lot of sense. All right. Then we have atomic testing and radiation exposure. Yikes. This is the 40s to the 60s or through the 60s. The U.S. government conducted nuclear tests exposing soldiers and civilians to radiation. Downwinders, people living near test sites in Nevada, Utah, and Arizona, developed high rates of cancer and other illnesses. Ooh, I'm burping up dinner. Sorry. In separate experiments, patients, including pregnant women and children, were unknowingly injected with radioactive materials to study the effects of radiation. This is some Hills Have Eyes shit.
Yes. And in that documentary, the Cold War, they do this whole thing about that and how people didn't know about these test sites. And there was like a Girl Scout troop that got, and I don't know if this is a conspiracy, but you know the Children of the Corn?
Yes.
Is that true? It was based off a real...
I don't know.
They say it's based off a real group of kids.
Maybe.
That I saw this on TikTok.
Then it must be true.
But that it was based off like a real group of kids. And there was like another kid that died.
I'm going to look
that up. They all did stuff at the same time. And these women all were pregnant at the same time. And then they all like passed out. Look at it.
Fascinating. Okay. Operation Sea Spray. This was in 1950.
We're not crazy.
No, we're like RFKing out over here. So the U.S. Navy sprayed a cloud of bacteria over the San Francisco to study biological warfare dispersion. No. Some residents developed infections, and at least one person is believed to have died as a result. Fuck you.
Operation Sea Spray? Why did they name them like perfume scents?
Well, sea spray, I mean, we live by the ocean. It sounds so pleasant. Don't you fuck with San Francisco.
I know.
Then there was the plutonium injection experiments from 1945 to 1947. This was radiation testing on civilians, y'all. During the Manhattan Project, U.S. government scientists injected unsuspecting hospital patients with plutonium and uranium to study the effects of radiation exposure. Fuck that. 18 people, including children and pregnant women, were exposed. How fucked up do you have to be to do that sort of thing?
Well, and also, you didn't get a taste of that in,
Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This was after.
Right? Yeah. I think you saw.
Right. Exactly. And 18 people, including children and pregnant women, are exposed. As I said, they never gave informed consent, believing they were receiving normal medical treatment. Some patients developed severe health complications and died from radiation poisoning. The experiments remained classified for decades. Great. So the compensation that's been offered to victims of this sort of experimentation is fucking weak. The U.S. government has implemented measures to compensate individuals affected by its chemical and radiological experiments, notably through the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, RECTA, of 1990. RECTA provides lump sum payments to individuals who develop specified diseases due to exposure from atmospheric nuclear tests or employment in the uranium industry. Here's the amounts, y'all. $50,000 for individuals residing or working downwind of the Nevada test site. $75,000 for participants in atmospheric nuclear weapons tests. $100,000 for uranium miners, millers, and ore transporters. As of January 2023, over $2.5 billion has been awarded to more than 40,000 claimants under RECTA. Dude, if the maximum claim is $100,000 and they've already doled out $2.5 billion, that just goes to show you how many people were impacted by this bullshit. Thank you, Joe Biden. He extended the filing deadline for RECTA claims by 2 years, acknowledging the ongoing need for compensation.
People might not even know that they are eligible.
They might not know. And
unless
also
Aaron Brockovich comes and tells them.
Got to get some Aaron Brockovich in there. And also so I was really pissed off, and I made a TikTok about this when Trump and Doge started cutting the VA. The VA got a lot bigger under Biden because he widened the scope for folks who fall into these categories where they've been exposed to toxins like burn pits and whatnot. And so they needed a larger staff to be able to intercept all these claims and support these vets, support the troops
serving the United States and and are now sick for life.
Yep. It's fucked up. So let's talk a bit about, I started thinking about this a lot as I was writing this. Like, we saw a lot of vaccine hesitancy during COVID, specifically from communities of color. More specifically, statistics show us it was Latinx communities and Black communities who had the highest rates of vaccine hesitancy. Let's talk a bit about this vaccine hesitancy and the link between that hesitancy and this country's shitty legacy of experimenting on people of color. So vaccine hesitancy amongst communities of color in the U.S. is deeply rooted in historical and ongoing experiences of medical exploitation and systemic racism. Notable instances like the Tuskegee syphilis study that we mentioned, that's just one of many instances. Additionally, unethical medical practices, including non-consensual surgeries on enslaved women, like you mentioned, and unauthorized use of biological materials from individuals like Henrietta Lacks, have further contributed to this mistrust. So contemporary studies highlight that this skepticism is not solely based on historical events, but is also reinforced by ongoing disparities and negative healthcare experiences. Research indicates that Black Americans often report less trust in medical professionals and more negative healthcare encounters compared to their white counterparts. So let's talk, Carolyn, how does this sort of historical trauma shape present day medical mistrust?
Oh my God, how could it not?
I know.
Wait, what's the island, the Hawaiian island, what's the disease? Oh, leprosy.
Oh, Is that a Hawaiian thing?
Well, wasn't there an island where, like, even though they knew, didn't they bring leprosy?
Dude, I don't know the history of leprosy, so.
Weirdly, my sister went to this island and apparently wasn't, because when you go on vacation, you want to have a leprosy tour. But I think she read a book. I was trying to look this up when I just found writing, and I think there might be some exploitation there too, because I was thinking Asian Pacific Islander as well must have. I wonder what the stats were.
Yeah.
With
No, you're right. 1866, during the reign of Kamehameha, I can never say this, Kamehameha the Fifth, the Hawaii legislature passed a law that resulted in the designation of Molokai as the site for a leper colony.
Yeah.
Where patients who were seriously affected by leprosy could be quarantined. So yeah, you're right. I don't know beyond that. I don't know what happened.
I think it was more like they were like Christianity got them before the leprosy could.
Oh, geez.
There was some weird fucked up shit that happened there too.
Okay.
Anyway,
interesting.
Back to this. So his historical trauma obviously plays a significant role in shaping present day medical mistrust, particularly among marginalized communities. I brought my new favorite book.
Ooh.
You read this?
What's it called? I can't see.
My Grandmother's Hands.
No, I have not read that.
It's by Resmaa Menakem. Menakem.
Okay.
Did I say that?
Menakem?
I think so.
I think. Sorry.
All right. So this is where I am basing this on. So first of all, if you want to understand about trauma, but probably this is the most digestible version of polyvagal somatic internalized trauma and how that ties in with white supremacy.
Oh, cool.
Very, very, very good book. Very smart. I like it. I sound like Donald Trump. It's very smart. I like it too because each of the footnotes will tell you like exactly where, like it's very well done. You even want to read all.
I'll check it out.
Anyway. So I'm going to base what I'm talking about on this book though.
Okay.
All right. So in My Grandmother's Hands, Resmaa explores how racialized trauma is passed down through generations, affecting how individuals and groups perceive institutions, including the medical system. And he emphasizes that trauma isn't just psychological, but it, obviously, as you and I know, it's stored in your body, influencing reactions to authority, healthcare, and systemic structures. So there's a legacy. When you have the legacy of the medical exploitation that you have given us, Tuskegee syphilis study, forced sterilization of Black, Indigenous, and Latino women, the exploitation of Henrietta Lacks. We've talked about the cells to contribute deep-seated mistrust. I think, what episode was that on that we talked about that?
I can't remember. We've done so many episodes, but we did. Yeah.
But, so there's a deep-seated mistrust in the healthcare system. So Resmaa his work aligns with this by explaining how these injustices are not just isolated events, but long-term patterns of systemic oppression leading to embodied fear and skepticism, which is often seen as the person being difficult,
right,
or resisting,
right,
or violent.
I got to tell you, the best interventions that I saw, because I was working directly with community during COVID, and the best interventions I saw were from Black community leaders talking to Black folks in the community about how important it was to get vaccinated because the representation matters, right? If somebody that you trust who looks like you is saying, hey, I know our communities have been through some shit at the hands of, modern medicine. This ain't one of those times.
Yeah.
And that worked so well. There's a woman in our neighborhood, and I can't remember her name, but she got an award because she got so many people to get vaccinated. It was amazing. Yeah. But that's the thing. There's a lack of trust. And it's justified.
There should be. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think anyone, the fact that even as a white person, you're saying, of course you trust the government. That's white supremacy in our bodies. Talking, right? Why wouldn't I trust that?
Not this white lady. Let me tell you.
All right. So he talks a lot about intergenerational trauma and the nervous system. This was probably, like I said, some of the most beautiful, easily to understand way of talking about this. So he argues that trauma is stored in the body and passed down through generations via our nervous system responses. What that means is that even if the individual has not personally experienced that medical abuse, the fear and distrust can be inherited through family narratives, cultural memories. And we talked about this before. The studies on epigenetics have proven, check it out, Yusuf, I'll put this in the show notes from 2018, a research article that shows that gene expression is altered, potentially reinforcing heightened stress response when interacting with a medical professional. Current health disparities, you talked about this really well. Modern studies continue to show that medical bias persists, reinforcing that mistrust. Black, Brown, Asian, Pacific Islander patients are more likely to have their pain dismissed, receive lower quality care, and face barriers to treatment. And typically that's a population that this is me making an assumption, but might wait longer to have Western medical interventions, either because of that or because they're trying different methods first. And then they're going to receive a bias and a negative way of interacting because of that. There's no cultural humility, in that. So Resma's perspective helps explain why avoidance of medical institutions, but I think it's more protective from, is not simply a matter of preference, but it's actually a survival mechanism deeply rooted in racial trauma. So we have to break the cycle. This is why I also love this book. Encourages addressing trauma at the bodily level through somatic practices rather than just cognitive understanding. It's just not enough. I can't fix a problem of the mind with the mind. It has to come from the body first. And Bessel van der Kolk is the book, The Body Keeps the Score, that most people read. I love this shit. I find that book really overwhelming.
Do you? I've actually never read it. I'm probably
dense as
the poster child of the theory.
You are, but it's you're not.
I really am.
But it's dense. I've only ever been able to follow it on audio. Because it's too dense for me.
Interesting.
And it's, at least this book, I'm not a great reader. I've almost halfway done. I got it a week ago. So it addressing these things, the goal is to have acknowledging the past harm. So that's what that person did in your community, developing body-centered resilience and reforming medical institutions to rebuild trust. I think seeing someone of your color and of your sex and of your gender and that looks like you and can talk to you from that perspective makes a huge difference. Right. So lastly, integrating these insights and not just the empirical research is great. That might only reach a few of us. It's up to the people with that privilege and with that knowledge to get that out to their friends and family and talk about historical trauma and the psychological burden, not just physiological reality that continues to shape this mistrust. So it's super important that we validate and create conversation and education around this. And there's so much. Like, how do you, I think the problem often is, well, I don't think it's a problem. I think it's something that we have to systemically look at, but there's ways to do this and there's ways to teach this. And there's ways to normalize and validate how someone is feeling and name that that's not nuts, but there's a reason why they're feeling something they're feeling. And before they can start healing, for example, if you grew up all the time brushing your teeth, that's a habit. Think about it. But if you're angry at yourself because you're having trouble forming a new habit that you've never done, often I'll tell people, like, got to get up for a walk in the morning. Get up. Don't look at your phone. Don't do that.
Yeah.
Well, if you weren't born doing that all the time, if you didn't have that morning routine, you're not going to do it. And that's not your fault.
Yeah. You have to retrain your brain.
And you also have to name why it didn't happen.
Right.
You know, that's a very watered down version of
sure. No, I get it.
Testing. Yeah. But, you know, if you were told, well, case in point, my dad's a doctor, my mom's a nurse. I was actually taught, you do not argue with these people. My parents would get really frustrated when someone would argue with them.
Well, for your dad, that might have been the narcissism.
He was a good doctor. I will give him
I'm sure he was. I'm sure he was.
Very much like, no, you go in, you're respectful.
Yeah.
And you listen, you don't argue with them. They're the professional.
We can also respectfully disagree, especially when we know what's happening with our own body and somebody's trying to give us a different narrative. And especially as a woman, and I imagine especially as a woman of color who typically don't get listened to. And this is why DEI is so important, y'all.
Yes.
This is what the Trump administration is trying to dismantle. Essentially trying to take away people in fields like the medical field who look like the people they're serving, which is going to establish a connection and trust and create a healthier society. They don't want that, obviously. No. There's a reason. Anyway, I just want to name that the woman that I mentioned, her name is Felicia Thibodeau, and she's rad. Cool. And she was working through the IT Bookman Center, but she was the ED of the Southwest Community Corporation. So anyway, local hero shit. Wanted to throw her name out there. She's a lovely lady. So let's move on to we're going to try to wrap this up in the next 10 minutes or so. So
here we go.
Psychological and sociological experiments. So there was something called the Monster Study. I'd never heard of this. 1939, conducted at the University of Iowa and funded by the government. It involved orphans who were subjected to speech therapy to induce or correct stuttering. Man, that makes me so sad. Since my kid has a speech disorder, some children developed lifelong speech problems and psychological trauma. Project 4.1. This was 1954. After the U.S. tested a hydrogen bomb at Bikini Atoll, I think I'm saying that right, researchers studied the effects of radiation on the Marshallese people who had been exposed without warning. Many suffered burns, cancer, and birth defects. The CIA drug experiments on prisoners and mental patients. 1960s to 70s, inmates and psychiatric patients were given hallucinogens like LSD to study behavioral control. Some subjects experienced severe mental health consequences. Then we have MK Ultra, our favorite, 1953 to 1973. A CIA program aimed at developing mind control techniques, often through unethical experiments. Subjects, including unwitting civilians and military personnel, were given LSD and other drugs without their consent. The program sought ways to manipulate human behavior for intelligence and military purposes. This is when we were actually like, you know, we didn't get along with Russia, and we were we weren't Putin's hoe, as Jasmine Crockett has so appropriately called Trump. Yes. This is when we were ethically and unethically trying to devise strategies to beat the Russians during the Cold War. Anyway, so there's several more. The Kentucky State Prison experiment. We have the McGill University, which was another experiment on prisoners. African-American prisoners as targets. In many of these experiments that I've mentioned, Black prisoners were disproportionately used as subjects, reflecting, as we said, racial injustices embedded within these programs. So we talked about this at the beginning of the episode, possibly Charles Manson in terms of MK Ultra. So the theory that Charlie Manson was an unwitting participant in the CIA's MK Ultra program, which sought to explore mind control through drugs like LSD, has gained attention through investigative works such as Tom O'Neill's book, Chaos, Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the 60s, and the recent Netflix documentary that we talked about, Chaos, the Manson Murders. So, you know, O'Neill, his research suggests that Manson's frequent arrests prior to the 1969 murders, followed by inexplicable releases, raises questions about potential government protection or oversight. Additionally, the proximity of Manson and his followers to individuals connected to MK Ultra experiments, such as Dr. Louis Jolly West, a psychologist linked to the program, adds to the intrigue. So there's a lot of things that probably aren't coincidence in this movie, this documentary we mentioned pointed out. But this dude, Jolly West, he's a prominent American psychiatrist, and he was super controversial because he was known for his work in brainwashing, coercive persuasion, drug abuse, and violence. His career was deeply intertwined with government psychological operations, including the infamous, as we said, MK Ultra program. So this guy was, I don't know about this man. So
there's so much. We could do a whole podcast
Carolyn,
on this.
Let's unpack this motherfucker
in 2 seconds. I can do this really quickly. First of all, you got to check out this documentary because it's going to do a way better job of talking about this than I ever will.
I couldn't finish it.
He was really well connected with the Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic, which you could go walk by still. You're looking at this thin line between scientific discovery and state-sponsored control.
Yeah.
And this guy was actually a POW in the Korean War. And he began studying indoctrination and brainwashing. He definitely, it's confirmed that he did conduct experiments unwittingly on unwilling subjects, including prisoners, mental patients, and civilians, giving them LSD. His interest was to understand how you could erase and reprogram someone's mind.
Dude, that's some Manchurian Candidate shit there.
They talk about that movie in here. He actually, one of his most controversial cases was a study of Jack Ruby, the man who assassinated Lee Harvey Oswald. West examined Ruby in jail and later decided that he had suffered a breakdown, fueling speculation that Ruby was subjected to psychological tampering.
Oh, shit.
He was also, I don't know why this was funny to me, but it's not funny. It's terrible. Strange death and conspiracies. He was connected to the mysterious death of an elephant named Tusco in the Oklahoma City Zoo in 1962. He injected the animal with an overdose of LSD.
What the fuck?
And it resulted in, it's like, how fucking psychotic would it be to be an elephant on fucking LSD?
Oh my God.
Fucking Lord.
What was he trying to do with that
I don't know. He's pushing the boundaries ethically and recklessly.
Wow.
So everything that he talked about in reference to Manson was these government projects on social controls.
Yeah.
He was very fascinated with cults, serial killers, and urban violence. His work on the Manson family and his connections to various government-backed psychological operations have led many to speculate that he was more than just academic, and he was actually operative shaping covert psychological programs.
This is some Mengele shit.
Yes, absolutely. He worked for UCLA. He, his legacy is that he definitely, again, this is someone who did pioneer an understanding of coercive persuasion.
Right.
He just did so without ethics.
Yeah.
So his ties to MK Ultra and his work in social control suggests he had a very significant impact on that. So where you might find this, enhanced interrogation practices. Things happening at Guantanamo Bay.
Yeah.
Probably because of him. Techniques involving sensory deprivation, disorientation, forced drugging, Echo West experiments with LSD and hypnosis, mass surveillance and behavioral prediction, modern psychological profiling, the predictive behavior models used in counterterrorism can be tracked back to his research, and programs like the NSA PRISMs and predictive policing algorithms rely on psychological models that assess potential threats, something he was very interested in, and our favorite, cult deprogramming and social engineering. Church of Scientology, the Manson family, his work influenced how the U.S. government monitors and infiltrates organizations deemed radical or extremist. So you're definitely going to see his legacy.
Yeah.
Not good.
Yeah, it sounds like he informed COINTELPRO, which it's like, okay, great. I understand how a group like the Manson family would need to be infiltrated and understood in order to, hopefully prevent, which they didn't do, shit like that. And like David Koresh and those folks. But COINTELPRO specifically went after activists and planted people within movements like the civil rights movement to try to undermine those movements. And I can imagine he was probably associated with those things if I were to do a little more reading on this motherfucker. So, there's unfortunately time and time in history, we see people who are incredibly intelligent.
White men.
Right. And have good ideas, but then use that intellect for really detrimental
social
purposes.
Media.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. All of the big tech bros that we talked about in our last episode. But yeah, and it's interesting to me too, also, like this was a doctor. And again, the bending of the ethics, or what we think are the ethics associated with medicine, and the whole notion of being a doctor, which is to do no harm, right? The Hippocratic Oath. You're supposed to help people.
Yep.
Like, did he go so far in his mind to say what I'm doing will ultimately help the human race, and therefore all of this is justified? Like, what were the mental acrobatics there?
Well, I think that's where you see that coming into play when it's used for patriotism.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
well, you're helping your country.
Yeah.
Are you?
Right. No, it's usually for the betterment and
White
for the
supremacy.
financial, that too, for upholding a system that's inequitable, and also ensuring that the people who are already rich are able to line their pockets or continue to line their pockets at our expense.
And keep other world cultures down.
Right. Of course, anybody who's not white needs to be suppressed.
Yes.
And that's what we're seeing right now. And that's why we thought this was super timely, because while there might not, as far as we know, be experiments happening on people against their will to this extent, first of all, I think there probably is. But
I think there is when it comes to social media and the connection with mind control.
Yes.
I do think that all of that is in play. And that's
for sure.
The tech bro shit is, while it may not have been intentional,
right?
That is absolutely, those algorithms might as well be an injection of syphilis.
It's true. And algorithms, there's I can't remember the name of the book, but it was written, this is probably 10 years back, but talks about like the inherent racism in algorithms, because it's people, usually white men, who are creating these programs. And so the algorithm generates racist results, or results from the perspective of the dominant group.
Yes.
And so when we think about neutrality in tech, there is no neutrality in tech. And as we talked about in our last episode, there's no neutrality in Silicon Valley, which is the birthplace of big tech. And so if the people who are the same ones who are talking about the quote unquote pussification of Silicon Valley, when people are simply saying, when are you going to hire more women? These are the people who are creating the algorithms that are ultimately spitting out racist shit.
Yep.
Anyway.
Full circle.
So you guys, these unethical U.S., this is our final thought on this. So we've been going at this for nearly an hour, and we got to wrap it up because it's Sunday night. So these unethical U.S. government experiments violated fundamental human rights and disproportionately targeted marginalized communities, including Black Americans, prisoners, the mentally ill, and military personnel. Many experiments were only exposed decades later, often due to whistleblowers, as you mentioned, lawsuits, and declassified documents. While the government has acknowledged some of these abuses, compensation and accountability remain limited. And that's the sad truth, y'all. It bums us out big time. It should bum you out as well. Please, we have a ton of sources that we always link sources, and we usually have no fewer than
from Reddit.
20 sources, that aren't from Reddit. They're peer reviewed, or they're from reputable publications. If you want to go further down this rabbit hole, we have given you the tools to be able to do that. So enjoy. You should be mad at your government. You should demand better from your government. And it is only through understanding what the government has done and continues to do that we can demand change. Change in this country has always happened from the bottom up. Remember that. But
start with your local community.
Yes, start with your local community, y'all. All right. So we're going to leave you now. Please follow us on TikTok. We have a really nice community of about 2,500 folks right now, like-minded individuals. We are TWAT, TWATJC on TikTok.
And Keanu Reeves.
Oh, Keanu, the real, it must be the real Keanu Reeves who's following us.
He likes us. He thinks we're pretty.
He thinks he loves us. Keanu Reeves is very radical. So anyway, follow us there. Follow us on Instagram. We don't seem to be able to get off the ground there, but that's the world according to Jen and Carolyn. But we live there as well.
Whatever. We got to get off Meta anyway.
We do. And all of our episodes are also uploaded to YouTube. We have to start putting more content there, because what if TikTok goes away? It's very likely that it could. So anyway, our next episode is going to be about tariffs, trade wars, and the Trump effect.
Whoa.
Tune in, bitches.
Bye.
Bye.